and this is Planet Talk.
What if?
Greetings. Welcome to this test run of Planet Talk, a production of the Archetypal Astrology News Network. I'm Chris McNulty, and I am your host for today's episode. Today is January 21st, 2021, one day after the inauguration of Joe Biden as president and Kamala Harris as vice president of the United States of America. There are some very powerful planetary archetypal dynamics at play, and I'm going to go through some of them as I see them and share some of my thoughts. So as I was watching the events of the inauguration, and I was not able to watch them live, I was working my day job, so I caught most of the day's events after they occurred and read many articles about it today. But as I was looking at what occurred yesterday, a momentous occasion, a huge shift in the American political scheme, especially from what we've been experiencing the past 4 years under the Trump administration, but also on the world stage, as America is a major force in the global community. I was struck by, first, the powerful square that we're moving into between the planet Saturn and the planet Uranus. These planets represent, and the square, which is a conflict or a tension or a fight between these two archetypes. Saturn representing the old, the entrenched, the traditional, the constricting, and Uranus representing the liberatory, the archetype of freedom, quick change, major shifts from one thing into another, flashes of insight. These archetypes were in display yesterday, this archetypal aspect, in what was collectively experienced as a political shift, but also as I was reading some analysis and looking at what was taking place, there was a tension between what was actually happening. Are we moving into a new American era, or are we returning to the way things used to be? Joe Biden has been in government for 47, 48 years. He certainly represents the Washington establishment. He is our oldest president. He is a white, cisgendered, educated, able-bodied, wealthy man. So he exhibits a lot of the Saturnian maintenance of what this country has been. But in comparison to what we've been living under the Trump administration, it is a marked shift from where we were to where we are now, just within the past couple of months. Another question that I've been seeing is, are we going to get the old Biden? The Biden who supported the Clinton crime bill that led to the mass incarceration, or the increased mass incarceration of people of color in this country? Are we going to get the Biden who was part of the Obama administration, an administration that increased deportations of undocumented people in the United States, an administration that employed the use of drones for extra-legal killings? Or are we going to get the Biden who he has professed himself to be on the campaign trail? A Biden who is interested and actively seeking to move the cause of racial justice forward, a Biden who wants to advance LGBTQ plus protections, a Biden who wants to uphold the status of women, a Biden who wants to create an America that is equitable for all people. Time will tell, for sure. And Joe Biden was born with a Saturn-Uranus conjunction, so he natally exhibits these archetypes, a confluence of these archetypes in who he is. So, time will tell, right? But we can see, immediately after the inauguration, Biden signed 17 executive orders. And, in the signing of these executive orders, I see the aspect of the Sun, Pluto, Saturn conjunction square the Uranus, Mars conjunction. The Sun represents leadership. The Sun represents the leadership of our psyches, our personal psyches, our cognitive abilities to creatively and intentionally produce the life that we want to live. It also represents the leaders of countries, kings, the divine right of kings. The Sun being associated with the leaders in the past and leaders today. So the Sun-Pluto conjunction that is occurring and has been occurring for the past few days represents the death and rebirth of the American leader. Donald Trump left Washington yesterday morning, and by the end of yesterday, we had a new president, a huge shift. And what Biden did on his first day as president was sign these executive orders. And the signing of executive orders is a putting into play of executive power, that Plutonian power to elicit change. The rapidity, the speed with which he signed these orders, I'm seeing in the square of the Sun, Pluto to Mars-Uranus. As Mars-Uranus, the conjunction of Mars and Uranus is just rapid shifts, courageous shifts, moving very rapidly from one way of being into another. And his executive orders, as Heather Cox Richardson analyzed in her daily briefing. Heather Cox Richardson is a professor of history at Boston College, and she analyzes political events on her Facebook page. What she pointed out was that many, if not most, of these executive orders are a way of bringing us back to the world that we lived in before Trump's administration. So some of the things that Biden did was to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, to start counting non-citizens in the census again, to defend DACA, to end the travel ban from Muslim-majority countries that Trump put into place, to stop the border wall construction. Really, a lot of what Biden was doing was just canceling many of the things that Trump put into place. And the Saturn influence on Sun and Pluto, this powerful movement back into history to where we were, is emblematic in this quick signing and these quick executive orders that Biden has put into place. He is moving forward on some things. You can see the Uranus influence in some of Biden's executive orders, such as his increase in federal discrimination protections for LGBTQ plus Americans, his mask mandate for federal buildings, lands, and interstate travel, his extending of the eviction and foreclosure moratoriums, his attempt to advance racial equity. One thing that he did was to order the Office of Management and Budget to analyze if federal money is equitably distributed in communities of color and other places of need. So he did do some work in moving forward what he promised on the campaign trail. So there's a lot of excitement in what Biden has done on his first day, and I'm looking forward to see how they will be advanced, how some of his movements will be advanced as he works with this new Congress, with the Democratic majority. Another major aspect that occurred yesterday, and I felt this as I was watching people's reactions to the inauguration. I was seeing this in my newsfeed as friends and old colleagues and old activist friends of mine were responding to what they witnessed yesterday during the inauguration. And that was just an incredible emotional release. During the inauguration, the moon was moving across the Mars-Uranus conjunction. And a moon-Uranus conjunction can be a catharsis, a release, a freeing of emotional burden. And I feel, and what I witnessed, since most of my friends and family and colleagues on social media tend to be on the liberal progressive side of politics, was tears at witnessing Kamala Harris be sworn in as vice president, as the first female, the first woman of color, the first African American woman, the first Caribbean American woman, the first Indian American woman to break that glass ceiling for executive power that has been in place since the beginning of this country. Just the visceral, emotional release and catharsis that happened during that event, I think was emblematic in the fact that the moon was present with these two really fierce, active archetypes. On the other side, for those who did not vote for Joe Biden, there were certainly feelings of anger towards Donald Trump for the Proud Boys as their leader was arrested yesterday. Lots of anger towards Donald Trump for more or less throwing his most ardent white supremacist supporters under the bus, at least verbally. There were certainly feelings of anger and feelings of pain in this country. So as the moon was moving through Uranus and Mars, the catharsis of a Uranus moon conjunction and the anger, the frustration, the anxiety that can come from a moon Mars conjunction was very much present in the collective zeitgeist in the United States as this transition took place. I have coworkers who told me that while they were watching the inauguration at work, they were just crying with customers. I saw posts from old colleagues of mine at the LGBT Community Center in Greater Cleveland expressing tears of joy, tears of release as they watched that historic moment take place. So, the moon's presence in what was happening was certainly portrayed in the collective feeling body. Another aspect that I feel is important to point out, some may disagree with the potency of this aspect as it was being played out during the inauguration, but as Ren Butler pointed out in his episode yesterday, we're in what is called the sunset phase of the Uranus-Pluto square, and which took place from 2007 to 2020. And during that time period, there was this release or this movement forward in evolutionary power and evolutionary activism exhibited in the Arab Spring, the Occupy movement, Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for immigrants' rights, all of these revolutionary, powerful, just volcanic eruptions of the movement toward human justice that took place during that period, we're now sort of getting to witness some of the outcomes of what took place in that time period. And I couldn't help but notice and feel the radical empowerment of women during yesterday's proceedings and in the announcements of Joe Biden's cabinet picks. The phrasing of the smashing of glass ceilings is very reminiscent and emblematic of the Mars-Uranus conjunction. Just this primal, punching through and up of smashing glass ceilings that have been put in place. And the inauguration itself was taking place at the very end of a Venus-Uranus trine and the very beginning of a Venus-Pluto conjunction. So while the aspects themselves were not particularly strong during this event, it was sort of like a handing off from Uranus to Pluto of Venus. Venus historically has been related to women and to femininity and to the feminine. And with the announcement of Biden's cabinet picks, his presidency has nominated the most women of any presidency to be in his cabinet, 12 women in total. Janet Yellen would be the first female Treasury Secretary. Deb Haaland would be the first Native American cabinet member. He just recently nominated Rachel Levine, who is the Health Secretary of Pennsylvania, to be his Assistant Secretary of Health. And she will be the first openly transgender member of a federal position, a federal official. And how mind-blowingly incredible is that? Kamala Harris was sworn in by Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Justice Sotomayor was the first woman of color to sit on the bench. Kamala Harris is the first woman of color to be in the vice president position. So there's this radical breaking of the glass ceiling for women in this inauguration. And as Venus moves into a conjunction with Pluto, Venus will be starting a new, year-plus long cycle with Pluto. This evolutionary, under the surface, volcanic, long-lasting power for women in this country. The Washington Post did an article on Joe Biden's cabinet picks, saying that in doing what he did, he is creating new norms of inclusion for the executive branch. So the long-lasting nature, hopefully, of his choices for his cabinet represent this powerful, this empowerment of women in the United States of America. So I welcome your reflections on that. Let me know if you see that in yesterday's events, but I felt like it was something that absolutely needed to be said. It was a day for women, not to mention Amanda Gorman's incredible poem that Ren archetypally analyzed yesterday. The youngest poet to speak at inauguration, a young woman of color, who was, expressing what we were experiencing in this moment in time. It was incredible. So one more thing that I want to share, as I was looking at the astrological aspects of this inauguration, I had a lot of fear around violent uprisings, given the Mars-Uranus conjunction that was taking place exactly during the inauguration, and based on what we saw 2 weeks ago with the uprising and the attempted coup at the Capitol building that resulted in the death of 5 people. And I was surprised to see that there was hardly any violence. I mean, no violence really. But even in the state capitals, where white supremacist groups were talking about storming, you saw one person show up at multiple state capitals. And the analysis of that was that the National Guard presence in the Capitol, the arresting of many of the people who stormed the Capitol, the preparedness of the states to meet these protesters or potential terrorists, all of that preparation prevented any major flare-ups of violence, or any flare-ups of violence that I have heard of during this inauguration. And I see that as being the intense power of the Sun, Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn, these planets, well, Jupiter and Saturn, the planets that represent our societal structures, our government, the Pluto lending its power to the solar leadership, and the way that our government, state governments, federal governments were preparing for this day really prevented, through the square to Uranus-Mars, of anything really happening in the United States. But I did wake up this morning to the terrible news that there were 2 suicide bombers in Baghdad in Iraq that killed 32 people, bless them and their families, and wounded more than 100 people in a public square in Baghdad. And as horrifying and as sad as that is, and it is, I think that event, that tragic, explosive, murderous, terrorist event in Iraq is emblematic of the Mars-Uranus conjunction, the surprise of violence, the surprising explosion, surprising deaths, aggressive rebelliousness. While no group has claimed responsibility for it, authorities are associating the event with the Islamic State. So there is this sort of like this revolutionary drive that the Islamic State represents as it tries to elicit terror in the Middle East. The Mars-Uranus conjunction square Saturn, this is the first suicide bombing that has taken place in Iraq in the past 3 years. And from the accounts that I've read, Iraq has really been in a movement towards increased safety, increased normalcy, however you might want to define that, an ease towards just living your everyday life, in a country that has been torn by war, by internal political strife, by international political strife, by what I think I counted 13 bombings and attacks that took place in 14 bombings and attacks that took place in 2013. For the past 3 years, there haven't been any suicide bombings or violence of that sort. And Saturn being the archetype of the past and history, what has occurred before, and Uranus, Mars, the surprise attack, the surprise violence out of nowhere in a public market. The way that people who have been analyzing this event have been talking about it is like it brings back the fear, Saturn, of the past, Saturn, through violent explosion and death. So I'm saddened to say that I think, what I and other astrologers were expecting to potentially see on Inauguration Day hit us from international news in Iraq. So those are some of my thoughts and astrological analysis of the past 24 to 48 hours. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you saw today, please subscribe to this channel, and please share your comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say and have to share. May your fire burn strong and your words ring true.